once again, this is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going over the PowerPoint presentations and looking at some code for Murock's Android Programming 2nd edition by Joel Murock for the AWD1112 or 1112 class and Java Programming. We're up to Chapter 8 of 18, How to Work with Menus and Preferences. I did want to take a little bit of a detour here, and I wanted to bring up the Murock page for this book. So I'm going on to murock.com, and there we go, Android Programming, and I'm going to find the table of contents. Again, what I want you to understand, this is the complete table of contents right here. We are going to go over chapters 1 through 4 in a fairly deep breadth of coverage. Chapter 5 and 6, same thing. Chapters 7 and 8 and 9 that you see on your screen right here. So these chapters in a lot of depth and breadth of coverage. These chapters 5 and 6 in depth and breadth of coverage. 7, 8, and 9, we're going to go over them, but it's going to be not in much depth. Chapters 10, 11, and 12, I'm going to lecture on here. I'm going to do the PowerPoint lectures, but I'm not even going to go over those in class. Chapters 13 through 16, we'll go over as much as time allows. The task list app is always a good one to go over, and it allows us to go into databases and some other stuff, as you can see on here. Chapter 17, I'd like to go through with you so you learn how to deploy an app. Chapter 18, how to work with locations and maps. Again, I will go over the PowerPoints, but I don't even plan on discussing any of the rest of it. So let's jump into Chapter 8. I'm on page 227, and as you can see right here, the chapter is entitled How to Work with Menus and Preferences. Now, many Android apps include menus that allow users to perform common tasks, along with different preferences that allow users to customize settings. A menu can include an item that allows users to display different preference screens to change settings. So that's what we'll look at in this chapter. So as you can see, our objectives are applied are very small. There's just two. Given the specs for a menu that contain one or more items, define the menu and its items and handle the events that occur when the users select those items. Next, given the specs for the preferences for an app, use a fragment to allow the user to set those preferences. Those are our two applied objectives. Our knowledge objectives: name and describe the most common type of menu, distinguish between an action item and the action overflow item, describe how Android decides whether to display an item as an action item or a menu item, explain how to use an intent to start an activity, and finally, in general, explain how the Preferences API works and list one of its benefits. So, here's an activity. This activity, as it says, has an option menu that has two items on it. So again, a menu can have one or more items. The items the menu has provide a way for the user to perform actions and to navigate through the app. Since a menu is hidden until the user activates it, menus can improve an app by hiding functionality that isn't normally needed. What this will do is it'll free up screen space. It also reduces clutter on the screen. So in Android, the most common type of menu is known as an options menu. And that's what's actually shown here. When we take our mouse and we put it over this, we get something that looks like this. If a device has a physical menu button, the user can use that button to display the options menu at the bottom of the activity. In this figure, the first activity displays a menu with two items across the bottom of the activity. If the device doesn't have a physical menu, button and action overflow icon is displayed on the right hand side, which would look more like this. So again, an activity can include an options menu that includes one or more menu items. If the device has a physical menu button, the user can use that button to display the option menu across the bottom of the screen. If the device doesn't have a physical menu button, an action overflow icon is displayed on the right-hand side. So, the action bar can display some or all of the items from the options menu as action items, depending on how wide that is. So it's considered a good design guideline to use it for a small number of commonly used actions. Here you've got the settings and about, for example. You can display it as text, as shown right here, or as icons, which are shown right there. If you specify an icon for an item, Android uses that icon in the action bar, but it uses text for the item in the options menu. Any items that aren't displayed on the action bar are displayed in the options menu. It's generally considered a bad design practice to put items that the user doesn't commonly use in the action bar. Android also provides for two other types of menus. Okay, the first is a floating context menu that will be displayed when the user performs a long click on a widget. So when they hold down on the mouse for usually over 2 or 3 seconds, this menu appears as a floating list of menu items. However, it's generally considered a better practice to use contextual action mode, which displays action items that apply to the selected item or items. Secondly, you can have a pop-up menu that's displayed when the user clicks on a widget or an action item. All right. So, 3 types of menus. I just showed you those. I'm up to figure 8.2 on pages 232 and 233. Figure 8.2 on page 233 shows how to define a menu. To do that, you add an XML file for the menu to the project's res/menu directory. In this figure, for example, the menu is stored in an XML file with a name that clearly indicates that the menu is for the tip calculator activity. The XML file for the menu begins with the root element named, suspiciously enough, menu. Within the menu element, the XML can specify one or more elements that define the items in the menu. In the example, the XML defines a menu with the 2 items shown in the previous figure. All right, both item elements have 4 attributes. They each have an ID, a title, an icon, and a show as action. The ID specifies the ID or the name that's used, so if you have to reference it in code. The title specifies the text for the item that's displayed in the menu. The icon specifies an icon for an item that's usually displayed in the action bar. And the show as action attribute specifies whether the item is shown in the action bar. When an item is displayed in the action bar, Android's default behavior is to display the icon for the item. Conversely, or from kind of the opposite, when an item is displayed on the options menu, the default behavior is to display the text and not the icon. If you want to use your own icons, You should start by copying the file for the icon into the appropriate res/drawable directory in the project. To find an icon for the item, you search through the standard icons that are available from different versions of Android. So you can look through the Android SDKs installed on the system, find the Android platform desired, and browse through its data, /res, /drawable folders, or just search the internet. What you see on the screen now, and also in figure 8.3 on page 235, is how to display an options menu. To do that, the code overrides the onCreate options menu, which is a life cycle method of an activity that Android calls before it needs to display the menu for the first time. Within this onCreate options menu, the first statement gets the menu inflator object, as you can see, and it is used to convert or inflate the XML into Java objects, which are stored in the menu parameter. Then that second statement returns a true value to display the menu. Android only calls the onCreate options menu the first time it displays the option menu. So you can't use this to update the menu each time it's been displayed. As far as how to handle option menu events, the next code example, the one that you see right here, shows how to handle the events that occur when a user selects an item from the options menu. To do that, the code overrides the onOptionsItemSelected method. Android calls this method when the user selects an item from an options menu. Alright, I have to pause for just a moment. Alright, sorry about that. I had to pause for a few minutes. So what I would like to do, double check and make sure on this. Okay, good. What I'd like to do is finish up talking about the overall menu stuff and go up to about page 238, which is on preferences, and then we'll split this into two lectures. So the code that is in figure 8.3 shows how to display an options menu. All right, and where is that? Okay, so again, it overrides the onCreate options menu. All right, that's a lifecycle method of an activity that Android calls before it needs to display the menu for the first time. Okay, within that, the first statement that goes in there again is going to do that inflating, or actually, you've got to look at it that what is happening is you've got a GUI, a graphical user interface, where you're dragging stuff in. When you drag that stuff in, XML code is also being written. So again, in other words, when I drag this stuff in, dragged in these controls before we put in anything in here, okay, this stuff was being written for us. We added some stuff to it, but you saw that. All right, the kind of goal or the thing that merges or melds or marries these two things together is in our app someplace, but it's in the R files, and I don't even remember where those are right now, and it's not that big a thing. But the point is, when you start going in here and you start looking at the stuff that's in here, there has to be a way of communication to take place. In much the same way, if I go out and start to create menu components, I have to write code to make them do what I want them to do. So this second example that you see right here, back up a little bigger. All right. This second code example here shows how to handle the events that occur when a user selects an item from an options menu. To do that, it overrides the onOptions item selected method, which Android calls when the user selects an item from an options menu. Now, on 236 and 237, they talk about how to start a new activity. A lot of people are confused over what an activity is. Normally, an activity, in my opinion at least, equates to a screen. Okay? So when an app contains more than one activity, menus are often used to navigate between those activities in much the same way that if you remember when we started to create websites, one of the first things we did was we created a simple website with an index page, an about page, and a contact page. And we would have a menu that would allow us to iterate or go back and forth between those pages. The idea is the same thing in here. But now they're talking about to do this, you need to create an intent. And as the author says, an intent is an object that provides a description of an operation to be performed. Now, the word intent makes sense. It's kind of like intend. It's kind of like what you intend to do. In this case, you need to create an intent for an activity. Then you pass the intent to the start activity method to start the activity, and that's what they're showing here. So the first example shows two different techniques to start a new activity. The first one uses two statements, where the first statement creates an intent object. It passes two arguments to the constructor of the intent class. The first argument specifies the application context, and the second specifies the name of the class for the activity. Then the second statement passes the intent object to the start activity method available from the activity class. Now in the second example, there's just one statement. It works the same way for starting an activity, but it's a single statement. Since it yields short enough code, it's the one that's typically used, but you could still see the first one. This shows how to use menu items to start activities. All right, so the rest of the chapter, starting on page 238 and ending on about page 253, talks about preferences or settings. So I'm going to put that into the second part of this lecture, and I'll be back with that shortly.